Good morning, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Ensuring Building Health, Leveraging Technology for Efficient Operation and Safe Environments, a really important topic in today's world. This session is part of the Maryland Clean Energy Center's Connecting to the Energy Economy Speaker Series. My name is Kathy Magruder. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Clean Energy Center. First, this morning, we'd like to get started with a few technical housekeeping items. Attendees are muted upon entry, and sessions will be recorded and posted online at www.mdcleanenergy.org speaker series. Questions for the panelists can be submitted throughout the program via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen or by raising your hand during the discussion at the end of the presentation. Polling questions will be used during today's session because we'd like to have some audience interaction. To answer a poll question, click on the radio button next to your answers and then click Submit. We're going to do a practice poll just to get started and find out a little bit about the size of the group that's joining us today. Remember just to click on the radio button next to your answer and then hit Submit. Our host will close the poll shortly, and when the responses come in, they'll share the results. The results of our poll should be showing on your screen now. You can see that most of you are just by yourselves. So we're going to do one more test question. Remember just to answer by clicking the radio button next to your answer and then click Submit. The poll results will be showing up shortly, and we'll get a sense of who's in the audience today. Great. Big group of industry reps. Thanks for joining us. Once again, this webinar is part of a series that we hope you'll be able to join for additional sessions. There are only 3 left in the series coming up in the next 3 Thursdays. Recordings of each of the past sessions and additional information are available online at www.mdcleanenergy.org/speaker series. The session this morning is brought to you by Siemens. And I'm pleased to have the opportunity to introduce our moderator this morning. Michele Mitch-Peterson is an Ingenuity consultant at Siemens Smart Infrastructure, and she will be introducing our panelists. Michele is a customer-first Ingenuity consultant for Siemens Smart Infrastructure in the Mid-Atlantic. In this position, Michele leverages her background in decarbonization, decentralization, and digitalization to help clients solve challenges as opportunities through total energy management to ensure energy is reliable, intelligent, sustainable, and its impact on the environment is beneficial. Michele has over 25 years of leadership experience in sales, marketing, solution design, and management. Since 2011, we're pleased to say that Michele served on the board of directors for the Maryland Clean Energy Center and just resigned in 2020. With the last 4 years of her term as board vice chair. From 2014 to 2016, she served as a member of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments Climate and Energy Policy Committee. In 2015, she was also appointed to the Maryland Climate Commission, Education, Communication, and Outreach Committee, and is a member of Virginia Governor McAuliffe's Committee on Energy Efficiency. She was born in Baltimore, grew up on the Eastern Shore, and resides in Annapolis, Maryland. She holds a bachelor's degree in marketing from Frostburg State University and a master's in business administration from Pennsylvania State University. She's my friend, and it's a privilege to welcome you this morning, Michele. Take it over.
Good morning out there, everyone, and thank you, Kathy. Hello to all. COVID has driven a magnitude of changes everywhere we look in all of our lives, and especially in our operations and our building operations. So how do we best ensure building health? And while we continually deal with changes and uncertainties that we're faced with, it seems like we're forced to think and look at and then rethink our existing buildings. I'm excited about the lineup of speakers we have today for you, because not only are they sharing impactful insights on how to deploy and leverage technology for efficient operations and safe operations, but they're also providing perspectives from both the commercial and the residential sectors. So we want to get started right away, but please remember they do want your questions. You've got some real subject matter experts here. So while they are speaking, we're going to take questions at the end, but please be submitting your questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen so that we can be prepared to answer those when we're finished. First up today, we're going to have Dr. Chris. Chris, would you like me to introduce you as the Senior Vice President for product at ARC?
Yeah, that works great. And I can take it from there.
Right.
Thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate it. And so I wanted to, so it's a pleasure. My name is Chris Pyke, and I am the Senior Vice President for Product at ARC. And ARC is a part of the USGBC and GBCI family of organizations. And so I'm an environmental scientist by background, and I'm excited to share with you exactly as we teed this up to say, hey, what does this safe and confident reentry to COVID mean for the ongoing work we're doing to promote efficient, sustainable buildings, spaces, and places? Can you go to the next slide, please, if you wouldn't mind? So what I want to spend just a couple of minutes telling you about is how are we responding, and beyond that, what does this say about a general approach to responding to COVID through space and building operation? First and foremost, the perspective I'm going to give you is rooted in this thing we call ARC. So as I mentioned, I work for both the U.S. Green Building Council, as you know, a 501c3 trade association. I also work for the Green Business Certification Inc., which calls balls and strikes on those buildings. And ARC is an itty bitty little thing that scores, benchmarks, and communicates performance based on real world delivered outcomes. And so the thing is that as we know, nothing is the same as it was 6 million years ago, back in March. And so if you go to the next slide for a second, I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about this thing we call ARC reentry, and because I want to reflect on that with you. So if you can advance to the next slide, it'd be great. Thank you. Perfect. And our purpose here is to add a dimension of facility performance that is related to infection control, specifically with regard to generating confidence in occupants and facilitating a safe return. If you go to the next slide, please. Our approach here is rooted in an evolution of what we have been doing the last several years with ARC and with LEED. And as many of you know, ARC has contained, on behalf of the LEED existing buildings rating systems, a component of human experience focused on occupant satisfaction and indoor air quality, specifically CO2 and TVOC. Back in March, I know that seems like 10 million years ago, at least to me. And back in March, our users came to us and said, hey, occupant experience is part of this, but we need to go deeper on facility management, occupant engagement, and change the way we measure indoor air quality to meet this moment with COVID and infection risk. And so we evolved our human experience category into a whole new performance category. Since we're going to have a bit of a geeky conversation, that involved adding 144 new variables to the system and a bunch of new surveys and a bunch of changes in IQ. And I want to share some highlights with you. And so if you go to the next slide, please. The key issue that I want you to take away is that our belief at a general level is that our management of infection risk and COVID specifically requires a management process change for facilities. We are not offering a stamp or a certification or something like that. We are suggesting what facility managers need to do is think about a process change. This is something we need to deal with iteratively for days, weeks, months, hopefully not years into the future. And so the elements of our approach to this, and frankly, what we think is needed is, one, health-based plans, policies, and procedures. So I cannot tell you what any given facility needs to do, but I can tell you that every facility needs to look at public health guidance and draw up a core set of plans, policies, and procedures. And we want to be able to help people bring that information into one place and share it with others, benchmark it, score it, those kinds of things. And that's what we're doing. We also know, as being realists, that there is a gap between our intention and the things on the ground. And so we want to engage our occupants to share their experience, to provide us with situational awareness about what is happening with these things. Are we getting it right? Are we not getting it right? And then we are going to measure stuff that they can't experience directly to inform our management. We're then going to benchmark it, analyze it, and repeat that. And we're going to do that week over week, month over month. That's our plan. And if you go to the next slide, please, for a moment, I want to dive deep into the three components, or not dive deep. I'm not going to speak that long, but I want to give you a highlight of what do these components mean? What does it mean for facility management? What does it mean for occupant experience? What does it mean for indoor air quality? So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to start with facility management very briefly. One is have a plan. And we believe that this really boils down to a core set of health-aligned infection control policies. As I said, our belief is, given the rapid change in policy, the rapid change in status, the rapid change in guidance and technology, we cannot give definitive guidance for every facility in a prescriptive way. We can say that every facility needs to look at the guidance and needs to present or tell us that it's not relevant their strategies around communication, signage, cleaning, disinfection, screening, air supply, HVAC operations, elevators, and water system management. We know that is the nucleus for everything. And so we've created a way to kind of report that in. And by the way, everything I'm telling you about right here is free, so which is a germane part. So no, don't get me. I'm not pitching you to buy something. Everything I'm telling you is free. So so if you go to the next one for a second, the next slide for a second, we understand that at the end of the day, we want to promote confidence in our occupants, which means they see and experience these policies. So it's not sufficient to simply say, I have the policy. As people reoccupy these buildings, so what we have done here is a little different. Unlike regular LEED, we have allowed people to segment their experiences to match the pace of reoccupation. So we may start with common areas. We then may go to common tenant spaces. We then may go to whole buildings, and we may work our way outwards from a core set of employees, your janitorial staff, your security guards, out to your essential employees, out to your whole tenants, out to your split shifts, out to your visitors. And what we're asking them is questions like this. Do you see disease control, communication, and signage where you expect it? I always do. I usually do, I never do. And the feedback we're looking for is, hey, I usually do, but I don't see it on the second floor today. So to provide yourself with that feedback loop so that you can take corrective action earlier in the cycle is where we're going. And so we ask these questions on a regular basis. If you go to the next slide, please, this is the last real content slide. Don't get worried, we're not going to go too deep. But the other change is around indoor air quality. And so we have evolved how LEED has been thinking about indoor air quality to really focus on, to be clear, we are not focusing on the presence of a virus, although there is some emerging technology that may let us do that or whatever. Today, we are saying, let's measure the air as a proxy for how well our management practices are working. And so as we all know, over time, the importance of ventilation as the number one. So we're talking about social distance, PPE, and ventilation. So CO2 is our best proxy. It is an amalgam of crowding and ventilation adequacy. So we want to have, that is our most priority item. And we're not using that as a direct measure of risk. We're saying, is your HVAC system working? Are your windows working? Are your occupants using them properly? And then we're looking at other metrics around relative humidity, where again, transmissivity, we're looking at TVOC. Are you over cleaning and under ventilating? Or PM, is your HVAC system filtration working? These are feedback information systems to your management regime. We're not doing this alone. We've provided pathways to let people manually enter data or enter data through sensor providers. So let's go to the next slide for a second. At the end of the day, it is on brand for ARC. What we do is we score, we benchmark, we communicate. So we turn this disparate information into a score. And basically that a score of 100 means, hey, you are doing everything in this lowest common denominator set. Your occupants agree that they experience it, and you are measuring it through available IAQ channels. So very basic. We are positioning ourselves as the Toyota Corolla of the infection control business. We are not the Cadillac. This is not everything you can imagine. This is a core set. And what we're asking you to do, which is different than where lead is moving from annual and monthly down to daily and weekly, so that you are increasing the cycle time to meet the moment. And so we are giving you a benchmark to say, where are you today with facility management plans and procedures? Where are your occupants? Where are your measures? And how is that trending over time? Go to the next one for a second. We're almost done. At the end of the day, our role is not to communicate for you. It's to give folks the resources that they have to communicate. We may have a vigorous conversation about if and when people communicate about infection control at all. It is a hot button and rapidly changing. I've been on the BOMA task force on this, and it's controversial. So what we're trying to do is give people tools to communicate. If they want to communicate through a 16-page comprehensive report, awesome. If they want to communicate through a one-page scorecard that says, these are the things I do, this is when I ask my occupants, and this is what I'm measuring, great. If you prefer to use the score, great. Whatever you need to be able to communicate, whether it's upwards or downwards, whether it's to your tenants or to your investors, we want to provide you with those resources because we want to create more transparency around this issue because we think that's what builds confidence over time. Last one. If we go to the last, clearly, I didn't want to take so much of your time that we have other things to talk about and other great people to hear from. Everything I have told you about and more is available in this guide to ARC reentry on our website. And so I would encourage you, if you find any of this interesting, to check it out. By the way, if you have trouble sleeping, as some of us do these days, this is great. This is 30 pages. I guarantee by page 12, you are out. But if you want to use it as a resource, it is available to you. It describes everything, including examples of how folks are using this in the field. And if you're really Johnny on the spot with this, we have a version 1.2 coming out at the beginning of October that reflects our learnings since June, because as we know, this is a rapidly evolving thing. So you can look out for new and better metrics. The last slide, and that's it. I wanted to leave you with a few places to go. So if anything I've said is of interest to you, you can find out more on ARC Reentry. As I mentioned, everything I mentioned here is available for any ARC user. You can collect data, you can generate a score, you can benchmark yourself. That's available to you. If you'd like to know how to get started, it's here. And I'm excited to hear from the rest of the panel about how they're doing this. The last thing I'll say is the reason folks are doing reentry with us is reentry is about meeting this moment. That matters. But we're really meeting the moment and laying the foundation for our long-term sustainability and efficiency play. So this is about meeting the moment, and we're working to do that in a framework that sets us up to get back to our long-term agenda. So we're excited about that. So Michele, please, thank you for the chance to say a few things, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the panel.
Thank you. And don't forget, folks out there, please be entering your questions as we're moving along here. Next, we have Jesse Kraft, who's the Energy Services Portfolio Manager at Siemens Smart Infrastructure. Jesse, good morning.
Hi, good morning from California. So yes, I'm the Energy Service Portfolio Manager, been with Siemens 10 years, working as an energy engineer, basically coming up with ways to make customers' automation systems work more efficiently. But what we found in the last 6 months is that is not really a topic that people are interested in anymore. They are interested in how they can use their building systems to address the issue of the day, right? So if you go to the next slide, what you'll see here is the eye chart. So Siemens has a lot of different technologies that are in buildings, ranging from HVAC control to building access, fire and life safety systems, a lot of different sensors and ability to figure out what's going on in the building. So what we did is we revisited all of those technologies that are already deployed in the field and thought about how can customers use them to make their buildings safer to reoccupy. I'm going to simplify this a little bit on the next slide down to really two categories. So first you have the technologies to control what's coming into the building, and that's people, right? So how can I make sure that someone coming in doesn't have a fever? How can I make sure that if somebody comes into contact with someone who does, I can do that contact tracing? And how do I make sure that my building isn't too dense, using the tools that we have to book desks and make sure that I'm keeping at the occupancy levels that the local authorities have deemed safe, which is usually well below 100% at this point. Most of what I have focused on is when something does get in, how do I minimize that impact, right? Because controlling the transmission of COVID through the air and those air quality metrics, a lot of those use the same tools that we use for energy efficiency, right? They're relying on the same technologies. What's different is in how we deploy them and in what we prioritize. So we're not prioritizing energy efficiency anymore, but we have some of the same tools in our tool set that we use in that manner. So if you go to the next slide, how do we decide how to use them? So, you know, we're all experts, we all have our own opinions, but really what's best is when you can look to a third-party independent organization that can do the research and set guidelines that everyone can have confidence in. And in my opinion, the organization that has done the best job of this, really getting down into the details, the tactics of how to control our buildings, is ASHRAE. So that's the American Society for Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. And they really set the standards for our industry of how buildings should operate. Back in February, they formed an epidemic task force to do research on the latest science. And in April, they came out with a relatively brief position paper that gave some tips of what we can be doing. But they continued that research, and then in July, they released this much more in-depth document, their building readiness guides. There's a lot of really great resources here. I encourage you to read the overall guides as well as the vertical market guides that are applicable to the types of buildings that you're running and operating. Let's simplify those 45 pages to a couple of quick bullet points. So on the next slide, what we look at this is a three-step process. So the first step is to enable remote access, because we want to be able to monitor and implement changes without needing to physically go to the building. And this is true both for service providers as well as your own building operators. The next thing we want to do is assess the system capabilities. So, you know, maybe you have an outside air damper that's been stuck and it's been costing you some energy. Not a huge deal. But now if outdoor air is going to be part of your safe reoccupancy strategy, you now need to treat that the way you would treat it if you had a critical life safety system. So if you have a system for an operating room or a clean room or a laboratory, you've already been doing a lot of this. Now we need to do the same things with our comfort cooling systems, because they're now going to be operated in a different mode. So once we've done that, we have essentially 3 dials in these systems that we can control. And that's temperature, humidity, and outdoor air. Outdoor air has been the area of focus for a lot of people, putting those outdoor air dampers to 100% and really ventilating the building with fresh air. That's not always the right thing to do for a number of reasons. So what ASHRAE has recommended is we want to make sure that the temperature in the building remains comfortable. So if you have a 95-degree day, you know, your HVAC systems were not designed to handle 100% outdoor air under those conditions. So you're not going to have a comfortable building. We also need to make sure that we're controlling humidity. Many of you may have seen that the CDC updated their guidance on COVID October 5th, so almost 2 weeks ago, where they acknowledged that airborne transmission is possible. And one of the major factors in how much airborne transmission will occur is the humidity of the air. This is one of the reasons why people have been talking about a second wave is coming in the fall and winter, is because the environmental conditions are going to change. And when the air is colder and drier, like occurs in the winter, it's more conducive to transmitting the virus person to person. So outdoor air is important, but needs to be operated with an eye on what temperature and humidity is going to be happening in the building. And all of these strategies should be implemented as a new epidemic mode of operation for your building system, because you want to be able to enable and disable this new different operating mode as needed. So if you go to the next slide. So when we think about this, what we're trying to do is the air be in that building, being that mechanism for transmission. There are different modes of person-to-person transmission, and that means there are different modes that we can take to reduce the concentration of virus. Deactivation being the most obvious one, where we shorten the half-life of the virus, right? We expose it to radiation, or we expose it to ionization. We can also dilute the air, right? We bring in fresh air. So if there's a lot of virus being generated by a sick person in the building, we're diluting that with new fresh air. And then the last one is suspension, which is I keep the air from being too dry, so those aerosol particles that I'm breathing out don't float in the air for an extended period of time. All three are important and should be considered to make sure that our indoor environment is as safe as possible when thinking about COVID transmission. So I believe that is the end of the slides that I've put up. So if there are any questions, or we can move on to the next speaker.
Next speaker. Thank you, Jesse. Up next, we have Adam Landsman, who is the president of PulseIQ. Adam, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here today. I'm going to share my screen. If you just give me a minute to do that, please bear with me. All right. Great. So thank you, Michele, and to the Maryland Clean Energy Center and to my fellow panelists for being here today. I'm grateful for everybody's time and interest. My name is Adam Landsman. I'm the president of PulseIQ, and I'm going to talk about the role of smart buildings in driving both healthier and more efficient buildings with a focus on multifamily. Now, the science is clear. COVID is airborne, and we've heard today about proven HVAC virus control methods from authorities like ASHRAE and the CDC. These include dilution ventilation, MERV 13 filtration, UV light and ionization, and control techniques like adjusting schedule sequences and set points in response to outside air, temperature, humidity, and CO2. And these control techniques are true of every building, but there are some unique considerations for multifamily, which we'll explore. And we'll also look at how modern energy management solutions address both the health of building and HVAC efficiency, and how policymakers can incentivize them. So even without COVID, multifamily properties are facing some structural challenges related to aging infrastructure and rising operational costs. And now they have to address new and increasingly stringent benchmarking and energy performance standards. Now, I'm not criticizing these mandates. On the contrary, they're absolutely essential to drive the adoption of smart building technologies. I can tell you from my experience in the multifamily property management space that it is notoriously tough to motivate these managers to try new things. They are the definition of technology skeptics, and they are laggards in the technology adoption lifecycle. Now, add on top of this the new challenges posed by COVID, and you have a whole nother realm of difficulty. First, these buildings aren't reopening because they never closed. They're occupied around the clock. Now, if you're lucky, you can choose to avoid the risk of going to the office, but for most of us, where you live is something that doesn't easily change. And so the people that keep these buildings running, the workers there, they're just working twice as hard and in a more challenging and riskier environment. So the next time you see a property manager or a maintenance technician or a janitor or a plumber, thank them, because these folks are absolute heroes. Second, rents are going down and delinquencies are going up, and landlords are largely unable to engage in normal collections activity. This means there's less money coming in, and much of this is likely going to be uncollectible in the long run. And third, building owners and operators are directly responsible for the health and well-being of their residents, and the civil liabilities that they face are a real concern. What happens if someone gets sick or, God forbid, dies and blames me? And these collections and liability issues are something that's going to play out over the next several years, and they're going to have a profound and lasting impact on the market. It's going to be every bit as deep and disruptive as the Great Recession, and probably more so. We just haven't started to see it just yet. So to recap, when it comes to addressing the challenges of the COVID crisis that we're facing, building owners and operators have a really daunting task. Financially, COVID control techniques require costly new equipment and operational changes at a time when money is already tight. Operationally, staff is overburdened, they lack expertise, and as we discussed, the building industry is incredibly slow to adopt new technology. 7 months in, the most common posture I see is a waited out approach. Most of the buildings I visit, including one I visited yesterday, really still haven't done anything new except to mandate masks in common areas and to move apartment showings online. Maintenance and capital investments are largely being deferred. And then there's the data problem. Because a lot of these buildings typically lack the means of gathering and analyzing HVAC data as it relates to both energy and COVID control, these critical systems are really operating in a black box. So this in turn limits the ability of owners and operators to make smart, data-driven decisions about capital investments and operations. Simply put, how can you manage what you can't measure? So this is where smart building technology and energy management and information systems come into play. The modern EMIS is a foundational technology for driving safe, effective, and efficient HVAC operations. Let's start by defining what is an EMIS. I think the best definition comes from James Dice's Nexus newsletter, which is an EMIS is a system of devices, data services, software applications, so the stack, that communicates with any building system or third-party data source, the scope, to aggregate data and transform it into new capabilities that aid in the optimization of the building. As you can see on the graphic on the right, there are a number of capabilities, and per James's excellent article, which I've linked to below, there are a lot of vendors that try to sell just one block as a standalone solution. The reality is that they're all highly interconnected. And the goal of an EMIS is to facilitate the interplay of these solutions in a way that best serves the client's needs. So according to the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, EMIS systems typically improve efficiency by 10 to 15% without capital investments for major retrofits. And this makes sense. We know from the EPA that the average building wastes 30% of the energy it consumes. So recovering half of this waste shouldn't be difficult with modern solutions like those offered by PulseIQ and others. In fact, we just did a case study showing how we more than doubled the efficiency of one of our clients' cooling systems. And a key part of that success is our deep knowledge and focus on the multifamily space. A quick look at PulseIQ. Our energy management solution opens up the black box. We use the power of IoT and data to make invisible problems visible and therefore manageable. And it helps building owners save money, which can help them cover the cost of some of their COVID-related improvements. And it also ensures that their HVAC is operating as intended, which keeps residents safe. The simplest way to explain how we do what we do is that we connect, collect, and improve. We connect to every piece of equipment and a wide range of sensors in the mechanical room, and we connect to every apartment with our unique patented mesh network thermostats. We collect millions of data points per year from all of these endpoints, and we securely send it to the cloud and make it visible to our clients with web-based dashboards. And we improve performance with software that provides real-time optimization, monitoring alarms, and actionable energy analytics. The result is an optimized building that's always running at peak efficiency. Now, this is how PulseIQ does it, but regardless of the solution, service providers are going to be most effective when they fully understand their clients' operations and pain points. Every type of building is managed differently. This is a function of construction type, occupants, and how they use the building, and ownership and rent structures. And beyond that, every building is unique. So there really is no one-size-fits-all solution. Industry-specific and individualized attention is essential for success. Now, thankfully, there's a vibrant marketplace of service providers offering tailored solutions for everything from office buildings to big box retail to hospitals and, of course, to multifamily. Let's take a look at incentives. The promise of the modern energy management solution is how they address these three problems we talked about around finance, operations, and data. They can help save money, which can be used to free up investment resources and COVID-related controls. They can help building owners and operators by taking the burden of implementation off their shoulders. And they can offer robust measurement and verification, not only for owners and operators to see how their HVAC systems are performing, but also to incentive program administrators who can get robust data on the impact of their investments. As noted, benchmarking and performance standards are key to motivating recalcitrant property owners to adopt smart building technology. And I think that one of the best ways to help use smart building technology to improve efficiency and building health is with monitoring-based commissioning. This is where an EMIS is used to constantly collect, monitor, and analyze large amounts of data, and to use that data to continuously improve building performance over time. More incentives are needed to help buildings lay the foundation, to buy down the upfront cost to install these EMIS systems, and to help cover some of the ongoing service costs. In Maryland, PEPCO's MBCX incentives are a really excellent example of a well-run and well-structured program. The folks at ICF there do a fantastic job, and it can serve as a model for other utilities and jurisdictions, but it can also be beefed up to drive higher rates of adoption, not only to meet the immediate challenge of COVID, but also to help achieve the long-term goals we have around climate and carbon. And finally, all of this supports local economies and local communities. Our buildings are a core source of our wealth and our tax revenues, and ensuring their financial health and the health and safety of their occupants should be critically important public policy objectives. Here are a couple of resources that you can check out on your own time. We'll send those around with the slides. And really, I'll leave you with the takeaway here that COVID really only underscores the need to accelerate the adoption of smart building technologies. And these technologies yield multiple forms of benefits for building owners, for occupants, and for local economies. And I'll leave you with a quote, as I always do in these talks, that energy efficiency isn't low-hanging fruit, it's fruit rotting on the ground. So let's go pick it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam, especially for a smile there at the end of your presentation. Our next presenter, next panelist, Tony Crane, is the owner of Efficient Homes. So another great panelist here speaking on the kind of the residential side of things. Tony, good morning.
Good morning, Michelle. Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody who's logged on and zoomed in and has taken some time to listen to us. Efficient Home is a general contracting company. We've been in the home performance, small commercial space building performance business for almost 15 years now. We do a lot of multifamily work. We do some things collectively with Adam at PulseIQ. And we also do a lot of residential, small box retail, small shops. So we're on a little different scale than some of my co-panelists this morning. Challenges, I think it's pretty clear. We got a lot of challenges in front of us. We need to make our buildings safe for our employees, if it's your office space, your customers, your tenants, yourselves. And while I think most of us would agree we've made some great strides with regard to social distancing and signage and sanitation spots and washing hands, some of us even wearing masks, there's still real strong evidence that the viral spread is done through aerosols in the air we're breathing in the buildings. And we believe that we need to, well, ironically, you know, we've spent 15 years making our buildings tighter, right, in the guise of energy efficiency. Well, I think we all recognize today that we have a responsibility to building owners and people in the buildings to provide a safe environment for them to work and live in. And to do that, we maybe need to reevaluate this concept of totally airtight buildings and focus on some other solutions in addition to social distancing, hand washing, wiping everything down that can help address spread of the disease, the virus, through aerosols. My co-panelists are with some really cutting edge companies doing great work, Siemens, PulseIQ, but that work tends to focus on large buildings, large commercial space, centralized physical plant, master meter type structures. And we have a massive percentage of our building stock that does not have a central plant. your strip center. You know, each little shop you go into likely has a unitized or a single forced air unit on the roof. Your restaurants, your Starbucks, the lobby and mall of the multifamily building. These properties present some challenges that are maybe underserved, as the bulk of the bigger companies, as they rightly should, are addressing the big office buildings and the big multifamily buildings. Like the energy efficiency world, we lack some sophistication in the smaller product, single forced air, smaller space buildings that can also be a little bit older, sort of what Adam was referring to in some of our multifamily housing stuff. So, you know, the approach to indoor air quality is nothing new. It's certainly nothing new in the central plant facilities, and it's truthfully nothing new in residential or small commercial. Sadly, it's not been embraced by many over the years. Our codes have been driven to make buildings more efficient and structurally sound. There hasn't been a lot of work on indoor air quality from a code perspective. Certainly there's some groups like USGBC who have done a great job of promoting this, but it's not mainstream. So sort of the issue is, how can we move in that direction to make our smaller properties, our systems and buildings with small forced air safer for the folks who are showing up there? And how can we get our employees safely back to work and make sure we're providing them an environment that doesn't make them sick? So the good news is there's lots of opportunities, and believe it or not, many of these opportunities are proven, have been readily available on the market for decades, are not horribly expensive to install. And I'm sure the others on the panel would agree, if you started to look at the cost of illness, health, employee well-being, you know, the cost to implement some of these measures, certainly well worth every penny. My company, Building Health and Efficient Home, we've sort of taken an approach. You know, there's sort of 4 key factors we like to look at when we go into a building. And as everybody knows, every building's going to have a little different structure, a little different makeup, a little different roster of challenges, and certainly a different menu for improving the air quality in the building. A lot of the guys have talked today, and I wholeheartedly agree. Enhanced ventilation. You know, as I said earlier, we spent a decade making buildings tighter and tighter and tighter. Maybe some review of that. Jesse talked a lot about the proper balance of makeup air from outside. You certainly have to factor humidity levels. You certainly can't overburden the system. But I think we can enhance ventilation in the building. At the same time, I think we can enhance filtration in the buildings. God help us, we all go out to Home Depot and buy a $1.89 filter that I don't even know if it has a MERV rating. You know, we can very easily enhance MERV ratings and filter ratios in our forced air systems. I'm not advocating you run out and shove a MERV 19 filter in your system. You do need to measure airflow. You do need to make sure you don't create static pressure problems, but these are not sophisticated analysis for a general contractor to make. So let's, if we can increase the enhanced ventilation of the building, let's increase the filtration. That's something everybody could go out tomorrow and do without spending a lot of money. And then let's talk about other ways we might treat the air in the building. We like ionization technology in my company. Ionizers and HVAC systems, the commercial guys will tell you they've been around for 30 years. They're available in residential structure. They're available for forced air systems serving small box, retail, restaurant. They're not expensive. You can put an ionizer in a duct flow system. The negatively charged ions are going to help kill off or deactivate some of the viral cells that may be in the air. They're going to help the inert matter that might be in the air clump, which means it can be caught by the filter easier. They're very low maintenance. You do want to make sure there's not an ozone challenge with them, but generally it's a tried and true technology. It's been around forever. UV lights, another option, again, been around forever in hospitals and labs. You can use UV lighting in your HVAC system if you like. It can go in your ductwork to try and treat the airflow there. We like to lean towards ionizers in the ductwork because the UV lights do need to be kind of maintained every year. You're going to replace it, whereas an ionizer will go and go and go. And as Adam alluded to earlier, sometimes building owners and their staff are not great about keeping their equipment in optimal condition. So we like a more fail-safe method if we can. But UV lighting can be used in ductwork and HVAC systems. We like to use UV lighting on sensors in high contact areas. We put them in multifamily in the elevator. So it's got a reverse sensor. So when the elevator door closes and no one's been in yet, or no one is in the elevator, it'll emit a UV light on the keypad where everybody's hands have been touching buttons. We've done them in mail rooms. We've done them in other areas. You need to have control measures, but again, a proven process and technology that's been around for decades, that if properly installed and maintained, provides a reasonable solution to improving the air quality without breaking the bank. So, I think there's a lot of solutions available. I don't think they're difficult to implement. We're hopeful that, as I think Adam referred to this earlier, maybe some of our utilities, maybe some of our local housing agencies, maybe some of our local governments. We've had energy efficiency programs incentivized for years. These sorts of measures can easily dovetail into those programs, and I think could be another method that, as a country, as an industry, we move in the right direction to quickly and more effortlessly start to provide some of these solutions for the folks in our country. So it's a lot of rambling. I burned through my 10 minutes, Michele, so I don't want you to give me the hook. I'm going to turn it back to you. Thank you for the opportunity to chat with y'all.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. And we do have two questions. One has already been answered, but I think it's a good question to look at. It's something that we talked about as we prepared for this session today. So I'll start with that question since we are talking about it. Sabrina, are you able to show the questions on your screen? If not, for those panelists or for the participants, certainly you can open the Q&A window that's in the bottom. But this question was raised by Nandini about the polarization ionization, and it's not part of the ASHRAE code for buildings. So she was asking, how do we include it as part of our strategy? And Jesse had answered saying that, and this is a really important point, that while it's not in the ASHRAE guidelines, just because it is not in the guidelines does not mean that ASHRAE has rejected it. And I think that that's a really good point to make, that in this time, we're so everyone is just so tense about doing the right thing and making sure that buildings are healthy and safe, that we look to authorities like ASHRAE and the CDC to give us guidelines. And sometimes when they're absent on something, we get a little bit concerned that, well, is that really viable? But really that ionization is. Dusty, do you have any other points maybe to make there?
I think you've basically hit the big ones, and this is a distinction that only an engineer could like, but a guideline and a code are two different things, right? So what ASHRAE has put out is not a code, which would typically say this is what you shall and shall not do. This is a guideline of, here's the things we've looked at so far, here's what looks like a good idea and not a good idea, but there's a lot of ideas they haven't looked at, thoroughly considered yet, and just because they haven't gotten to it yet does not mean that it's been rejected at all. So if you think ionization is a good idea for your facility, and as we've talked about, as long as it's not an ozone generating technology, which there's lots of very clean ionizers available now, absolutely take that step if you can.
Thank you, Jesse. And another point, I think that, and I'm sure if there's any other panelists that would like to comment, is that UV and ionization can be used to help people come back with confidence to the buildings, because they do help what gets in, and then if it does get in, help to get rid of it. But long term, UV and ionization also help with energy efficiency, because they keep your coils clean, which will ultimately, you know, obviously help with your energy efficiency. Any other comments out there from my panelists with regards to UV ionization, UV and ionization and energy efficiency?
Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind is that we're talking about, as a control technique for COVID, going to dedicated outside air ventilation or full outside air ventilation. And I think if you have UV and ionization techniques implemented in your buildings, it will allow you to more safely recycle air, and that will help decrease the energy burden when you have these, you know, 110-degree days in Arizona, and there's just no amount of air conditioning that's going to keep that building comfortable. So in some cases, I think they're going to be really essential to helping meet both the comfort and the safety challenge in these buildings.
Thanks, Adam. And Nandini, thanks for the really good question. The first question was asked by Dawn around the ARC platform, and this was another good question specifically for Dr. Pyke around getting access to the reentry platform. Dr. Pyke?
Yeah. I appreciate the question. And the bottom line is fortunately, very simple. So ARC reentry is available for free for all ARC users. So anybody can log in. And the way that folks log in is using either a usgbc.org credential or i.e. password and account, or if you have used Lead Online, the same credential works. If you have worked in a project in Lead Online, you'll actually see that project in ARC. If you want to create a new one, you can do that. And just for the sake of clarity, when we talk about a project, we're talking about a commercial interior or a whole building. It is possible to use the system for single family homes, but that's not the intended use case right now. And so you can log in, you can use it for free. You'll see it as a new performance category and under the leadership menu. So if folks have questions, I'll put my email in there that they're welcome to reach out to me. But bottom line is, if you've ever logged into usgbc.org or Lead Online, it's there waiting for you right now.
Thank you, Dr. Pyke. I think that's a really important point to make is, you know, having the visibility in the buildings of, you know, whether you've got hand sanitizer stations or you have, you know, things on the floor directing people where to walk. Those are things that really do give people confidence as well when coming back into buildings and in those spaces, or whether you have, I know at Siemens in our offices, we have masks. So we have masks all over the place. We have gloves, and in almost every corner you go to, there's a station there with sanitizer, masks, and gloves. And it really does, you know, it does make you feel secure, as well as you get your temperature taken when you walk into the building. Pamela is there with her gun, and she takes your temperature. But
I think there's a lot, just to add to that for a second. I think there's some experiences that we all had coming out. I mean, unfortunately, going all the way back to post 9/11, where there are some things we do behind the scenes to increase safety, but there is real tangible value in the things you can see. They may or may not be the most important things, but we are humans, and we need to see that stuff. And obviously, one of the challenges here is, unfortunately, we're going to need to keep this up for a while. You know, week over week, month over month, and I think we're pretty good at, you know, a day one solution. Like we get our systems working. Unfortunately, in this case, we're going to need to sustain that effort for a little while longer, and so that's a challenge.
Yeah, thank you, though. I really appreciate that perspective this morning, because I think that's a lot of the battle is just that upfront perception of, is this a safe space just to be in, without knowing what's going on behind the walls or what may have been installed on an air handler. I think it's a great point. Thank you. I also noticed here we've got some good chat going. I love the chat from Eli. We really, as a panel, I know we wanted to talk about incentives. And we had talked about that in our prep session. Specifically, we had talked about rethinking, again, not just how we use our buildings or how the buildings are being used in operations, but rethinking how we're incentivized today and how buildings are incentivized, and potentially how that may work. One of the things we did not talk about was the CARES Act funding. I want to make sure that a lot of the folks that have dialed in here to this session, please know that CARES, a lot of the technologies that we've talked about, CARES funding is applicable for these technologies. So you can use the CARES money to implement the UV, the ionization, a lot of these things that we've talked about. But we did, as I said, as a panel, we did talk about thinking differently about the resources that we have and the resources that we're getting from government. in dealing with how we use our buildings and the different technologies that we are implementing.
Well, Michelle, I can't speak to the large building scenario, but I do know in Maryland, we do a lot of work in Maryland, we do a lot of work in Delaware. There's lots of programs available to fund for energy efficiency improvement. Of course, Empower Maryland's got buckets of money, right? It seems to me that the same, you know, we had the discussion about the Healthy Homes initiatives that have kind of been around for a while. There's a guy named Joe Allen out of Harvard who did this really cool study that talks about sort of monetizing the value of healthy buildings, about how employee productivity goes up, how obviously absenteeism drops down. So
or even students, right? Or even how students learn better, whether it's a higher education at a university or whether it's an elementary school, fresh air and lights and
good
lighting. I mean, everyone thrives better.
So absolutely, I think, you know, I think a positive, it's hard to believe there's going to be a positive byproduct of this mess, right? But I think a positive byproduct of this could be a shift to an, you know, as a byproduct of trying to address the COVID challenge. Maybe we can have a fundamental shift in our approach to indoor air quality and its value in all of our buildings moving forward. Not just, you know, we squeezed it down to save an extra 2% on the energy bill. I mean, this guy Joe Allen does some great research about, you know, you take the cost of an employee who's out sick 5 days a year and it makes the 2% energy savings for the whole building look preposterous. So to the extent that we could maybe dovetail some of these efforts to existing initiatives that are already in place, the mechanisms are in place, the agencies and program implementers that run them are in place. Let's broaden maybe the financial funding pool to include indoor air quality measures. If we've got to say it's because of COVID, great, but I think it's going to not only benefit addressing COVID, but probably, you know, the health of the occupancies of the building moving forward.
I agree, Tony, that's a really great point. Because as you said, I mean, there's study after study after study about the importance of good air quality in buildings and how that impacts those that use those buildings. Dr. Pyke?
I just wanted to thank you. I wanted to just add to what Tony said really, really quickly, because I think in that spirit that the world is just different now after 6 months of this craziness. But for years we've been talking about productivity. We've been following Joe Allen or Berkeley or those other folks, and those are all true. But we were dealing with, you know, can your building yield a 2 or 3 or 5% improvement in productivity? And those mattered. Now we're talking about, can you reoccupy your building at all? So the only point that I really wanted to make was, in terms of a cost benefit equation, we've moved these issues from can you generate 2, 3, 4, 5% additional productivity to what fraction of the year will you be able to use your asset? And I think that that's a wake-up call to how these are treated and what the cost-benefit relationships are. And I think we're still getting our head around what a big change that is. It's closer to if the return on investment was valid before, and it was, it's orders of magnitude more important right now. So just wanted to offer, thank you for the chance to say that.
Sure. No, good point. Good point. So from the panelists though, we have obviously a lot of folks are concerned, there's a lot of uncertainty about how they're going to maybe use their buildings moving forward, right? So how do we help them address making the investment in some of these technologies when they're not, you know, when they're really not sure how, but there's just so much uncertainty? Thoughts?
So I think it's going to be different for every type of building, and the urgency is going to be different for every type of building. It's going to be really different for restaurants and retail stores than it will be for multifamily. But at the end of the day, what the people that live in or visit these buildings want to know is this building safe? Has this person done anything? I think it would be helpful if there was some public way to recognize folks that have taken the effort to put these techniques in place. You see signs that say, you know, we observe mask wearing in this store, and that gives people the sense that, okay, this is a safe place if I want to go in. But what about around HVAC? That's something I don't think anyone's really talked about that might be really helpful. I'm on the board of my synagogue, and we're helping the preschool there to reopen. And, you know, when we're talking about attracting parents to send their kids back to preschool, they're going to be interested to know that We've put in HEPA filtration, that we're putting upper room UV lights in, that we're addressing our filtration and outside air ventilation. I think if people can show that, it creates a marketing opportunity and a way for them to differentiate themselves in the marketplace.
Thanks, Adam. Dr. Pyke, with your association with USGBC, have there been any conversations around that, or how that might be measured or advertised or promoted in terms of buildings?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that we are, I think we've had different, the short answer is yes. The slightly longer answer is, I think it's complicated. I think what we have seen is a question about how folks want to communicate this information, and when or if and what the balance between being transparent to create that value versus real and perceived risks of liability by making claims. So we don't yet know how to exactly thread that needle. So if you look at us as a family of organizations from USGBC, we've got well and health and safety rating, and what we're doing with reentry on one side, trying to directly help people communicate what they're doing. However, even just over the last 6 months, we've seen people swing back and forth, and we have a whole family of LEED Safety First pilot credits that are supposed to do these things. The challenge has been, under what circumstances do you want to communicate, and with whom? Because I think we've seen people both go from, yes, I want to communicate a lot right now, to I want to put a label on my building that says I'm healthier, and then also concern what happens when I do that and someone gets sick for things that I couldn't control. And I think that I think as we've all understandably gone down this journey, I don't know quite, I think different market segments are in different phases. And I don't know that we've come to kind of to grips with that. Just to put a bow on it, I think we know that there's a benefit. We know that that a package of solutions, I think as Jesse said, this is about whole system thinking. And so when you do those things together, we can reduce risk, but we're not sure how to exactly communicate the issue of, despite our best efforts, we can't remove risk. And that makes for a challenging consumer conversation. So anyway, that's kind of where we are. So yes, across the family, we're doing that. No, it's not entirely simple. And I wish it was a little simpler, but it's not.
Sure. No, I do. And it is a lot of complexity, but I think that I hope that through our session today, we've helped, you first start with the plan, right? So I hope that we've helped folks think about it, and because it can seem overwhelming, right? It can seem like just a huge hill to climb, right? Where do you start? And I think, we really did start off with you, Dr. Pyke, and talking about, having that plan, and then measuring it and communicating it so that so there's transparency, which in that transparency gives people confidence. Mm-hmm. So really it's starting with a plan. Yeah,
that's right. And everybody can do that right now. And I think that, and unfortunately, for better or worse, those plans are making the best plan you can today, and then revisiting that plan in light of stuff. We don't have unfortunately the luxury to be able to say that's the same plan you're going to have 90 days from now, but it's your plan to get started.
Yes, it is. It is, Dr. Pyke. Thank you. And we have to continuing, as we've said, we have to continue revisiting them, rethinking them, revisiting again, and rethinking again. And I think to Tony's point too, I mean, there will be some good things that there will be some good things that come out of COVID, and there will be. I know one for me in particular is that we do have 50% capacity in restaurants right now. So I feel like I actually have some privacy when I'm dining out. I don't feel like I'm having a conversation with the table next to me. I do see we have two open questions that have come in. First one again is from Dawn, a great question. Does anyone know if PACE financing can be used for these technologies? Great question.
Generally speaking, yes. PACE will cover anything that can show that it will be cash flow positive and will pay itself back over time. And like we spoke about, most of these energy management tools that are out there are things that are going to be cash flow positive in the long run, if not in the short run.
Great, thank you, Adam. And then the second question is from Dr. Isaiah Williams. To what extent are educational institutions seeking advice on safe and healthy improvements for facilities relative to ventilation, filtration, UV lights, and ionization to minimize transmission of the virus? So he's looking for responses from all of us. For me, I would have to say that the higher education customers that we work with at Siemens, as well as the K through 12 customers, they're all in different places. They're all in various needs and various stages based on their openings. Some of higher education in Maryland is open and some are not. So it really, some have, and so some, I guess to answer the question directly, some have certainly sought out to all of us for advice and help to creating those healthy environments for coming back with confidence. But it just really depends on where they're at in terms of reopening.
This is a question I've actually thought a lot about, in particular in the public K-12 space. You look at the bureaucracy around engineering and capital investment decisions in the public school space. And what worries me is that, we have an immediate challenge and an immediate need, and different parts of this country are really pushing their schools to reopen if they haven't already. And the decisions that we need to make to get these schools operating safely with new equipment and new practices and new resources are things that traditionally take years. So it's a concern.
I can add to that too, Adam. It's interesting. We have reached out to some local jurisdictions, and well, you know what it's like calling a local jurisdiction to try to get a decision on a capital improvement. Conversely, we've been contacted by a lot of privately held daycare, nursery, private schools. Some of those, they're kind of real anxious to get something going. So it's, as you said, Michele, it's very fragmented. It's clearly a fragmented market because you go from everything to, university scale down to, single pad nursery school. But I agree with Adam. I think, there doesn't seem to be a huge shift to address the immediacy of the safety of the schools that are, maybe bigger institution or bigger government controlled.
And to that, just adding what Tony said, I think it's been also laid bare. I think it's been a open secret that ventilation rates in a typical K-12 classroom are poor, and there are substantial areas of underperformance. I mean, anybody who's run a CO2 meter through a K-12 classrooms in the afternoon, it is not unheard of to reach, let alone 1,000 ppm, 1,500, 2,000, 2,500. And if we're looking at guidance, just using CO2, for instance, as a gauge, if we're looking at guidance saying, hey, for instance, Richard Corsi from Portland State yesterday was kind of promoting these figures by saying kind of a SIPSI style guidance saying 600, 660, 700 ppm is a good indication of places where exposure over a 1 hour period could be significant. Well, jeepers, there are not a lot of classrooms out there that don't that are occupied by anything close to regular density that don't hit 600, 670 ppm. So I think it's laid bare a kind of a deficiency and under delivery that is not COVID. It's been there the whole time, but now we have a reason to be concerned about it. And so I think grappling with that as we go forward, it's really hard to square the guidance, and it is such a level of underperformance that relative to other commercial and institutional buildings, ventilation levels in individual K-12 classrooms are just we're in a rough spot. I think that's pretty clear, and it is fragmented, as everyone said. Unfortunately.
One immediate thing they could do would be to try some air balancing in these buildings. That's a quick and easy step that they can take.
A lot of these organizations, they have kind of a tradition of self-implementing, right? So they have limited budgets, they have people they're paying. So their solution to a lot of these problems is, how can I use this person I already have to address this problem, right? So they will have they'll have the janitors cleaning the school every night using the chemical sprayers, right? Or they'll have the building automation person controlling everything manually by hand, trying to keep on top of it, and they get so wrapped around the axle with these short-term measures that they don't really take the time to come up with a long-term plan. And that's what happens when you have like a really cash-strapped organization. That's becomes the culture.
Thank you, Jesse. So were there any other, we did talk a little bit about ASHRAE, the CDC, the Harvard School of Public Health. And we did, again, I think it was important to talk about how because it may not just be in the ASHRAE standard doesn't mean it's not applicable or in that guideline. Are there any other guidelines or places that we could go for information, or any other places we would recommend for the participants on the call? I know, Adam, you had a few listed on your slide deck, but I'm wondering if there's anything that we haven't covered here.
I listed BOMA as one. I think they have some operationally minded suggestions on how buildings can open safely.
Okay. Any other good webinars that anyone has seen, or any other good types of sessions like this? I know certainly, obviously, our neighboring states have sessions like this, and I know, Tony, you're part of the Maryland Building Performance, part of the Maryland Building Performance and Maryland Building Association. Are they putting out any guidance or guidelines?
No, we focused, we're more of a contractor-driven agency and organization. So, you know, we do some advocacy for folks in the field, and we focused a lot on, you know, getting employees properly protected, transmission of the disease, PPE, but we've not come out with a position or a webinar or a white paper with regard to how to address what we're discussing today.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure that we'll see. I wish I was a PhD student right now. All this code would be some great dissertations out there to write if you were in a PhD program. Thank you for this question. We do have a new question there for the panelists. In an effort to create healthy buildings, does the green buildings movement have a role or a place in the conversation? Are these movements exclusive, or should they be considered simultaneously?
I certainly have an opinion if I can jump in. I also give you one more resource from the last, so I'll definitely jump into that question. And first off, but if folks are in the public assembly type business, it's one research. We have been working with a group called the Green Sports Alliance, which has put out a guidebook called Ready to Play that focuses on return to public assembly. And so it is focused on sporting and entertainment venues, but it also could be applied to larger public assembly facilities in specific terms. So I'll put a link in the chat to the Ready to Play handbook. It's available from their website, but it reflects the experience of groups like from the Washington Nationals all the way down to, you know, other groups. So I'll share that. When it comes to the specific question about the green building community, I think there's two prongs. One is, I think that folks involved in green building who have been on the forefront have found that their green buildings have left them prepared to deal with this problem. And so one of those is they often have controls and air systems that are more advanced and more flexible, allowing them to purge and ventilate and do demand control ventilation and things in a way that they are pleased by. They're like, hey, we can take action through systems we've already invested in, because maybe whether or not it was because it was a green building, certainly encouraged because it was a green building. So we have folks on the ground who are finding it easier to manage because they have those systems. The second part is, I think right from the get-go, green buildings and healthy buildings are the same thing, and whether you pursue them in a singular way, that's a choice. But it's funny. I had occasion just yesterday to look back at the USGBC website from 1999. It was, someone passed it around, and it reinforced the mission of providing healthy spaces for people and protecting the environment. And so this idea about maintaining healthy IEQ with ventilation, filtration, and these things is a 20-25 year campaign, and a reaction to kind of the industry's underperformance coming out of the 70s. So so anyway, bottom line is, these shouldn't be separate. There are benefits right now. And so whether you are building more capable buildings and taking advantage of that, or whether you are kind of packaging up this combined value proposition. And the last thing I'll say is, you know, we are, at the end of the day, if you look at our colleagues in Europe and other places in the world, you know, this build back better, the idea that we are dealing with infection now, but ultimately we need to prevent the next crisis. We will catch up with that sentiment, and it's coming to us. So thanks for that chance. Yeah.
Great question. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to add on. I mean, if you recall Jesse's slides, step one is having the foundational technologies to simply connect to these buildings and their systems. And I think that's the critical element that's maybe missing in a lot of smaller, less sophisticated buildings and facilities. And that's where health and efficiency can go hand in hand. Once you're able to connect to these buildings and accumulate and gather and analyze data in real time, then you can use that to both drive efficiency and health. So you're looking at, how your systems are performing, how many kilowatts per ton of cooling you're consuming, but also you're looking at what is my CO2 concentration in parts per million? How are my VOCs doing? So just having that foundational connectivity is really important. And that's something that, again, that we offer, but I think that really is incumbent on policymakers to prioritize in their incentive schemes. It's 2020.
Great.
Why aren't our buildings smarter?
I think something we recognize as energy efficiency professionals is that we talk about the benefits of green buildings and indoor air quality, but then when it comes time to put pen to paper on a project, a customer asks, well, how much energy is it going to save me? What's the ROI? What's the simple payback? Because ultimately they pay an energy bill every month. And when you're trying to justify an investment, that takes the forefront. And hopefully, talking about good things that will come out of COVID, it's kind of a weird thing to say, but if there is something along those lines, it's that people really do recognize the value of having a healthy building, and they will actually use that value in making investment decisions.
Great point, Jesse. Thank you. Tony, do you have any final comments?
Well, I love everybody's input. It's been really helpful for me. And I love part of what you were saying before. Yes, Chris, I agree. Let's get a plan in place, but I'd also suggest a lot of these potential solutions to increase our indoor air quality are readily available today. They're not monumental expenses, particularly when you look at, like everybody, I'm paying a lease on my office space every month, and we're alternating employees, and there's a big cost to this. And I know I can make my employees feel safer. We've got air scrubbers in every room. We've got, a number of measures that are readily available and could be readily available for a number of people in the country. So start with your plan and then do a little bit more. And let's start to implement. So at some point, we got to get everybody back to work. We got to get restaurants open. We got to help the people who need the income. We got to have our world back to us, and it's doable. It's frightening, but it's doable. So let's get started.
Great, thank you. Well, and it has been a good session today. We've talked about different methodologies. We've talked about technologies. We've talked about some low cost things that you can do, and we've talked about some more broader things, and then also the plans and the things to think about in getting there. So I hope you all have enjoyed it. Kathy, do you have any closing remarks?
I just want to thank you, Michele, for moderating and the panelists. I think we've opened a really important door towards looking at the future of our buildings and our schools. I think you've given us some great ideas for future sessions with particular audiences, school facilities managers, public officials that need to fund these improvements for
you saw Nandini's comment on healthcare. Who thought that certainly some
that's a great,
good
that's
just
a
to
great
have
idea.
one.
So,
Yeah, that was a great idea too. And then we've got a lot of our panelists here have provided a lot of other resources I see here in the chat box, which is outstanding as well.
That's right. And want to remind everybody that we have 3 upcoming sessions, and this session's recording will be available online if you missed it, or if you have someone you'd like to share it with, we can send a link. Once again, Michele, thank you. Thank all of the panelists, Adam, Tony, Chris, Jesse. It was a great session, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thanks again.
All right. Stay well, all. Thank you.